He only drank a little beer. Don't overreact. That was what my dad yelled straight into my face, right when I caught my younger sister handing a beer can to my daughter, who was only 4 years old at the time. Even though I had warned them many times, no one in the family ever saw it as serious. Just a few minutes later, my daughter was in critical condition. From that moment on, the relationship between my family and me began to change so that we could never go back to how things used to be. Follow along with the story, and I'll tell you what happened after that. Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Hale. I'm 31 years old and live in Appleton, a small town in Wisconsin. I work as a refrigeration systems technician for a local hospital. It's a steady job with a decent income, enough to support my little family. But what I'm most grateful for every morning isn't the stability. It's the presence of my husband, Nick, and the smile on the face of our 6-year-old daughter. Oh, to keep that smile on my daughter's face daily, we've had to give up more than most people would imagine. Not just time, money, or effort, but a part of our family relationship I once believed could never be damaged. Everything started to change on the day everyone thought it was just another ordinary family gathering 2 years ago. And from that moment, I realized that some mistakes, once they happen, leave consequences you can never undo. I still remember that day clearly. It was a hot summer afternoon, the day my younger sister Julia officially graduated from college. In my father's eyes, it was the proudest moment of his life. The celebration was held in the house's backyard where I grew up. The scene was just like every other family gathering. Grilled meat, loud music, bursts of laughter, and plastic tables arranged in a circle around a cooler packed with foaming beer cans. I pictured it all in my head when I got the invitation. I knew beer would be part of every conversation. It had always been a staple at any family reunion, like a summer ritual that no one ever thought to question. So before we left, Nick and I sat down and reminded each other to watch Olivia closely. We both understood that the little things could quickly turn into real risks in a crowd buzzing with laughter and beer. Olivia had always been a curious kid. She'd seen adults raise cans to their lips and asked what was so special about that drink. Once, when I grabbed a beer from the fridge for my dad, Olivia reached out to touch it and tilted her head, asking earnestly, "Does Grandpa drink that because it tastes good?" That innocent question caught me off guard, not because I was embarrassed, but because I realized how closely she'd been watching. In her little mind, a dangerous curiosity was taking shape that needed to be handled correctly. I remember the last time the whole family went on a trip together. While packing our bags, I heard my dad laughing loudly in the yard. He held a beer toward Olivia, teasing, "Let's see if you're grown up enough for a sip." Luckily, I stepped in just in time, calmly but firmly stopping it. There was no argument, just a look from my dad, half annoyed, half mocking, as if I was overcomplicating something that to him wasn't a big deal. But to me, it was never a small thing. That's why I kept Olivia close at the party that day for nearly half an hour. It wasn't until a relative called me over to help at the grill that she slipped out of my sight for just a few minutes. What I didn't know was that something impulsive had already happened in those few short minutes, something that seemed harmless, yet it was enough to ignite a conflict that no one in my family would be able to ignore ever again. While I was standing by the charcoal grill, leaning over to flip a piece of shoulder meat that had started to char, I still thought Olivia was somewhere near the fence. The sun poured across the backyard, casting a sticky heat that clung to my back like sweat. In that brief moment of distraction, I didn't realize she was no longer within my line of sight. I didn't know that Julia, while live streaming from her phone, had picked Olivia up and sat her on her lap, then handed her a half-finished beer can with her voice raised full of excitement, facing the camera like she was part of some challenge show. She said, "Let's give my niece a graduation challenge. Just one sip so she knows what life tastes like." Olivia, thirsty after running around under the late afternoon sun, took the can in her hands. With the innocence of a child who didn't yet understand the limit, she took a long sip. The adults around them didn't react. Every face in that moment lit up with excitement, as if they were watching a harmless joke at a summer party. The sudden burst of clapping and loud laughter from the tables made me turn my head, and in that instant, my whole body froze in the suffocating heat of the afternoon. I realized it had already happened. Not a possibility, not a vague fear. It was real. It wasn't until much later, when I rewatched the live stream from a relative's phone, that I saw the whole scene on the screen. The comment section was flooding. "Julia, are you insane? This is not okay. Please don't give beer to a kid." Alongside the comments were angry red-faced emojis, glaring eyes, and a wave of disapproving reactions from strangers watching online. But in that moment, when I saw my daughter holding a beer can, I didn't need a single comment to understand what was happening. The anger inside me rose layer by layer, like a fire spreading from my chest to my hands, clenching tighter every second. The moment I saw what was happening, I rushed over instantly, like everything around me had disappeared, and there was only one instinct left: get my daughter back. I yanked the beer can from Olivia's hands in just a few seconds and threw it to the ground. The liquid splashed everywhere, spraying across my legs and the nearby table. My breath was heavy, my face burning, and I shouted at my sister, "Are you out of your mind, Julia?" She's only 4 years old. A few people nearby jumped at my voice while Julia froze briefly. She took a step back, a flash of confusion on her face. Then, with a forced smile and a shrug, like she was trying to brush off the tension, she said with a careless tone, "It was just one sip of beer." "You're overreacting." Hearing that, it felt like a chill ran down from the top of my head. I clenched my teeth and forced my voice to stay calm as I asked, "Are you sure it was only one sip?" Julia didn't answer. Her silence echoed louder than any excuse, as if that silence itself confirmed everything I was afraid of. Just as I started to step toward her, my father, Mark, walked over from the side. He moved slowly, but his eyes had a clear edge to them. His voice was raspy, low, steady, like he was saying something he had already decided on. He only drank a little beer. Don't overreact. I froze right then. My heartbeat felt like it had been gripped and squeezed, not just because of what had just happened, but because of that careless response from the one person I'd once counted on to understand the line between fun and recklessness. At that moment, Nick came running out from the house, his face pale with panic. He nearly collapsed when he saw the broken beer can at my feet. Without hesitation, he lunged toward Olivia, still standing in my arms, looking dazed as he wrapped his arms around her, his hands shaking slightly. His eyes locked on her face. He whispered, "Olivia, look at Daddy." "Are you okay?" But Olivia didn't respond clearly. Her breathing started to break up, shallow and uneven. Her face turned red, unnaturally and persistently so. Seconds later, Nick's voice cut through the air, shaken, sharp. "Linda, her face is flushed. She's not breathing right. I'm calling an ambulance." As soon as he finished his sentence, he dialed 911. His voice was tight but steady as he spoke each word into the phone. "My daughter is 4. She just drank beer. She's showing unusual symptoms. We need an ambulance immediately." A few minutes after Nick ended the call, Olivia began to gag. Her body started to tremble, her skin went cold. Her little hands grabbed his shirt, but she didn't have the strength to hold on. I bent down, placed my fingers on her wrist, and felt her pulse skipping light, fast, and erratic like a signal crying for help. In that moment, the entire backyard fell into absolute silence. No more laughter. No one is pouring another drink. Every eye turned toward us, but no one could find the words to speak. All we could hear was the sound of an ambulance siren getting closer every second, and I knew then that what had just happened was only the beginning of something far worse. About 15 minutes after Nick called for help, the ambulance turned into the narrow driveway leading to the backyard. Its flashing lights swept across the trees, casting red and blue glows onto frozen faces like the entire party had just been put on pause. Before the paramedics could even reach us, Nick had already dropped to his knees beside Olivia. When he saw her start to slump toward him, he immediately laid her on her side on the grass, cradling her head with both hands, the reflex of a teacher who had done this countless times with students in his classroom when a child showed signs of fainting or a minor seizure. He kept whispering her name again and again, slowly and steadily. "Olivia, Daddy's here. Can you hear me?" I stood behind them watching the whole thing. My legs started to tremble with a rhythm I couldn't control, like my body had taken over and was feeling the kind of fear I couldn't even put into words. It was helplessness spreading into every vein. I didn't step forward. I didn't interfere. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew Nick was doing exactly what needed to be done. Everything he did in that moment was precise, careful, and calm. Olivia didn't respond anymore. Her face was flushed, but her skin had gone pale. Her breathing came in short, broken bursts. Her eyes didn't focus. They drifted as if she was slipping into some dark place I couldn't reach. When the paramedics arrived, they checked her pupils, took her pulse, and quickly lifted her onto a stretcher. Nick never let go of her hand, not even for a second. As they loaded Olivia into the ambulance with Nick by her side, I ran to my car, started the engine, and sped after them, chasing the sound of the siren through the fading evening light down the road toward the highway. Behind me, the backyard was utterly silent. Julia stood leaning against a large tree by the fence, her eyes blank. Her phone, which had been lifted, was already turned off. My father stood near the table, arms crossed, his face caught between confusion, shame, and fear, or maybe nothing, just frozen. A few relatives whispered. A little kid started crying out of fear. The air was so heavy, so still. No one seemed to know what to do next. Out on the highway, I tried to keep my hands steady on the wheel. I knew Nick was sitting beside our daughter in the back of the ambulance. He was still whispering her name. Those words meant for no one else but the child he once held against his chest in her earliest days. As for me, I could only repeat one sentence in my mind over and over, not sure if it was a prayer or a silent scream swallowing itself. Please don't let this be serious. Don't take my daughter away. And when the ambulance turned down the main road toward the hospital, I knew another door had just opened, one I never wanted to face. The moment the ambulance reached the hospital gates, Olivia was rushed straight into the emergency trauma room. Within a few minutes of the initial examination, she was immediately moved into the rapid response area. An on-call emergency physician, Dr. Healer, stepped out with a grave look in his eyes. His voice was firm, stripped of any trace of comfort. She's suffering from acute ethanol poisoning and severe hypoglycemia. If this had been delayed by just a few more minutes, there could have been permanent brain damage. Hearing that, Nick's hand slipped from the armrest. His face turned pale, but instead of breaking down or collapsing, he shook his head. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he couldn't allow himself to fall apart. Not now. A few minutes later, another doctor informed us that Olivia needed neurological monitoring and would be moved to the pediatric unit for close observation over 72 hours. Her condition had temporarily stabilized, but there was still a risk of long-term impact on her cognitive development. Nick nodded softly, trying to keep himself from shaking. As for me, I didn't respond, not because I didn't understand, but because I wasn't sure if I had the strength to take in anything more. When Olivia was brought into the recovery room, her small body looked almost swallowed up by the wires and monitors surrounding her. A medical staff member walked over to the reception desk and called my name. She introduced herself as Dana Morales, a Child Protective Services, CPS representative. With a soft but firm voice, Dana informed me that according to protocol, every case of ethanol poisoning involving a minor must be officially investigated. The police had also been notified and were already on their way. At that moment, Dana looked at me, eyes still fixed on the file in her hands, and asked in a professional tone that wasn't cold, "Who gave the child the beer?" I glanced at Olivia through the glass window of the recovery room where she was lying motionless, and in a low, slow voice, I answered almost like I was speaking to myself. "Julia, my sister. She said it was just one sip and she was live streaming it when it happened." Dana wrote down what I said, then closed her notebook without asking anything further. But I knew that from that moment on, my answer had become part of the official record. It wouldn't stay in that room, and it would lead to consequences no one in my family could have seen coming. After Dana left, I sat in a chair outside the recovery room next to Nick. He didn't say a word. His hands were clasped tightly on his knees, his eyes fixed on the white tile floor. His body was drawn tight in every muscle, like he was holding himself together against exhaustion and fear at the same time. As for me, I just kept staring at my daughter through the glass, listening to the steady beeping from the monitor. I could only wait for a twitch, a blink, any small sign to know that my daughter was still here. And in that waiting, I began to realize what had just happened wasn't going to end when we walked out of the hospital. It would follow us. And this time, it wasn't just between me and my family anymore. While we were still sitting in the hospital, eyes fixed on the recovery room, unable to stop worrying. The backyard party at my father's house on the other side of town had ended in complete silence. People left one by one, each carrying their own emotions, most of them a mix of confusion and fear. I never imagined that the party thrown to celebrate Julia's graduation would become why our entire family was placed under a formal investigation. About an hour later, my father and Julia arrived at the hospital, but when they saw two police officers standing alongside a CPS representative, my dad only left a short message. "Just stay here with the kid. Let us know if there's any update." Then, without another word, he and Julia turned and quickly walked out through a side door before any of the investigators could approach or ask a single question. I didn't get up. I didn't call after them. In that moment, watching my family come and go in such a rush while everything still hung in uncertainty, all I felt was a quiet emptiness. I couldn't tell if it was disappointment or sadness. I just knew it felt familiar. I'd gotten used to them retreating whenever it was time to face something real. And this time, I didn't expect anything different. That was the feeling of someone who had finally come to understand. Some people will always choose to look away, even when the truth stands right before them. Later that night, Nick and I were asked to meet in a small administrative room to speak with the police and Child Protective Services. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. We were asked to recount the entire incident, what happened, the party's context, Olivia's medical condition, and details about the person who had handed her the beer. After recording our statements, the CPS representative informed us they would evaluate our current guardianship arrangement. At the same time, they issued a temporary directive. During the investigation, Olivia was not to have any contact with any members of my side of the family unless a court-approved supervisor was present. Nick and I didn't object, not because we wanted to cut anyone off, but because at that moment, our only priority was our daughter's safety. The next morning, I arrived at my father's house as requested by CPS and the police to assist in verifying the party scene. Two vehicles pulled up in front of the gate right on time. As I exited the car, I saw my father standing on the porch. When the investigators asked to speak with Julia for an official statement, my father replied that my sister was resting and not available. He didn't invite anyone in, and he didn't open the door fully. His voice stayed restrained, but firm. "She made a mistake, but what's done is done. I don't think there's any need to dig deeper." I stood a few steps away, watching quietly. I heard every word, every heavy breath between lines of dialogue. No one raised their voice. No one moved forward, but everything was clear. Every avoidance and glance that refused to meet another eye showed that my family had entered a phase none of us could fully name. And as the air around us thickened with silence, I started to feel something waiting for me, something more profound than anger, settling just beyond where words could reach. After my father refused to let Julia speak with the investigators, I said nothing. The exchange ended quickly without leaving room for anyone to back down. I returned to the hospital with the two investigators in silence. Olivia was still in the recovery unit under continuous neurological monitoring. Doctors told us she was showing signs of sleep disruption, unstable light reflexes, and would need to be observed for at least 2 more days. Through the frosted glass, I saw Nick sitting beside her, one hand holding hers, the other resting lightly on her chest, as if checking each breath. His face was tilted toward her, his eyes locked on every small expression that crossed her face. Watching the two of them through the window, my heart tightened. In that moment, not because I feared the worst might happen, but because I could feel the guilt beginning to settle into every breath I took, the kind that comes when you realize you failed to keep your child safe, even though you believed you'd done everything you could to protect her. Later that afternoon, the police informed us they had finished cross-checking statements with the evidence collected. Even though the original live stream had been deleted late the night before, multiple copies had already been saved and submitted through other channels. The data from video files, screenshots, and access logs was consistent in time, location, and action. Investigators concluded the case file had enough grounds to be forwarded to the district attorney's office. All key facts had been verified, including the severity of the harm to the child's health. I didn't ask for anything more, didn't request to see the footage. I just sat there listening to each step of a legal process I couldn't stop and couldn't take back. And in that moment, I began to understand what lay ahead wasn't just about justice or punishment. It would forever shift where we stood within the family, even if we still called each other by the same names. 2 days later, I got a call from the county district attorney's office. The decision to prosecute had been signed. Julia was officially being charged with a felony, endangering the welfare of a child under state law. That same afternoon, Julia called me. The moment I picked up, her voice came through hoarse and breathless, like she'd been running a long distance without knowing where it might end. "I'm sorry. I know I messed everything up, but please don't go to court. If you stay silent, I still have a chance not to get convicted. I've already lost everything. I can't lose more." I didn't respond. Both ends of the call went silent. There was no argument, no promises. I ended the call quietly, then sat alone in silence, not because I didn't know what to choose, but because I knew exactly what the choice meant, and that was the part that unsettled me the most. I thought of Olivia, still lying in the recovery room, surrounded by wires and monitors. I thought of Nick, who had barely left her side since we arrived at the hospital. I thought about what I had once sworn to protect, and what I had once believed was sacred between two sisters. I didn't know how to keep both, not because I lacked the strength to choose, but because I understood too well that every choice carried a loss. In that moment, sitting alone in the long hallway, under the cold, white hospital lights, old memories began to resurface. They returned every sound and image in full detail, like a tape rewinding in slow motion after years. And in that memory, I wasn't a mother. I was just a child. It was another party. There was beer, and no one stepped in to stop it. I still remember that afternoon. I was 7 years old. My dad had taken me to a party at an old friend's house, a small wooden home out in the suburbs with a backyard packed full of folding tables and beer coolers. The men sat in circles talking loudly, slapping each other on the back, pouring drinks without pause. Julia was just a year old then, asleep at home with Mom. I hadn't wanted to go, but Dad said I needed to get out and learn what being a grown-up means. Around halfway through the party, with the air thick from alcohol and cigarette smoke, my dad waved me over in the middle of his friends' laughter. He stood up, put a hand on my shoulder, and roared, "This is my daughter. Because you're all here today, I'm letting her have a taste." In front of me was a half-open can of beer. He popped open a new one, poured it into a small plastic cup, and pushed it into my hand. There was no laughter, no teasing, just the serious look in his eyes, and one short command. "Drink it. Show them." I was scared. My hands shook as I held the cup, but I didn't dare say no. I tilted my head back and took a sip. The bitterness hit instantly, and a burning sensation slid down my throat. I coughed hard. My face flushed. My eyes stung. Everything around me suddenly felt strange. My head spun. My stomach churned like waves. I tried to stand upright, afraid I'd get scolded if I didn't. Luckily, nothing worse happened. I just felt drained and eventually passed out on a stranger's couch. By then, my father was too drunk to stay conscious. He was slumped in a recliner in the living room, breathing heavily, eyes shut. One of the men from the group called my mom and told her she should come pick him up. But the most painful part was that she never made it. On her way there, her car was hit at an intersection just a few blocks from our home. Struck by a pickup truck, the driver was confirmed to be intoxicated. My mother died before she could make it to the hospital. I don't remember what happened after that call. I only remember I didn't go home that night. I slept on that long couch by the window in a room filled with smoke and my dad's friends' crumbling laughter and hushed panic. He stayed passed out, unaware of everything. The others whispered to each other, sometimes saying her name, sometimes murmuring about the accident, then falling silent again. Back then, I didn't understand everything they were saying. All I knew was that something inside me felt unbearably heavy and unfamiliar, like something had crossed a line far beyond what a 7-year-old could comprehend. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I remember perfectly how it felt to wake up the next morning. I opened my eyes, looked around, and the room was silent. Maybe the news had come during the night. Maybe someone had said what needed to be told while I was sleeping. And maybe I'd heard it and forgotten the way children sometimes do as a defense against loss too great to hold. Since that day, I haven't touched a drop of alcohol, not out of fear, but because I know exactly what it can take away and how fast it can do it. And now, with everything pointing toward the upcoming trial, I know I can't stay silent anymore. Because I was once the child holding a beer with both hands under the gaze of a father. And now I'm the mother standing at the edge of a choice only I can make. While I was still lost in those painful memories, a gentle hand on my shoulder startled me. Nick was standing there, his face worn from too many sleepless nights, but his eyes in that moment were brighter and more resolute than I'd seen in days. In a low, steady voice, he told me that Julia had just called him. I didn't respond. I kept my head down, eyes on the tile floor. In my mind, I already knew what she had said. I didn't need to hear it again to know she was apologizing, hoping I would back down. A few seconds later, Nick sat beside me, his gaze still locked on the glass door to the room where our daughter was lying. He clasped his hands together gently, then continued, his voice clear and unwavering. Same thing she said to you, right? Another apology, another plea for forgiveness, and another hope that we'll pretend like none of this ever happened. I turned to look at him. I didn't see exhaustion on his face for the first time in days. Nick had moved past the panic, past the waiting. What remained now was the clarity of a father who would do whatever it took to protect his child. With a calm, steady tone, he said, "Tell Julia she's lucky Olivia is still here, and I will do everything I can to make sure this doesn't just fade away like it never happened." After those words, I sat in silence. But what I felt wasn't torn between two sides anymore. It was something steady, something clear, slowly forming inside me. I knew that if I stayed silent now, what I would lose wouldn't just be my sister. It would be the only trust this man had ever given me. That afternoon, we received word from the doctor that Olivia's condition had stabilized. She was moved to a step-down unit for monitoring before being cleared to go home the next day. When I heard that news, I bowed my head, gently squeezed Nick's hand, and silently thanked God that our daughter had made it through the worst. But I didn't expect that just a few hours later, another notice arrived from the district attorney's office. Julia would officially stand trial, charged with felony child endangerment. After everything that had happened, I thought this would surely be our family's breaking point. I figured maybe just this once my father would choose silence, or at the very least step back and keep some distance from the storm we were all still trapped in. I was wrong. He showed up not to offer peace, not to ask questions or seek understanding. He walked into the hospital with one reason alone, to lash out at me for not protecting my sister from the consequences of what she did. The moment he saw me in the hallway, without hesitation, without greeting, he marched straight toward me, his voice loud and biting. "You've gone too far, Linda. Taking your sister to court. Do you even consider her family anymore? She made a mistake, but she's still your sister." I didn't answer right away. What rose in me, after hearing that, wasn't anger. It was a kind of coldness, like someone standing in snow for too long, numb and raw, but not surprised. Then he looked at me with even more intensity, his voice lower now, but still pulsing with resentment. "You're her big sister. You should have compassion. She's young. She doesn't understand how the world works yet. She lost her mother before she even learned to say her name. She's had it hard enough already." And with that one sentence, it felt like someone had redrawn my sister's entire life with a single stroke. Poor girl. A girl who should always be forgiven. A girl whose missteps were just the fault of life being unfair. But in that portrait, there was no room for me. No line that showed everything I'd swallowed. I always stepped aside so she could be seen as the one who'd had it worse. At that moment, I wasn't surprised or even hurt, just something dull and familiar rising in my chest, like standing in front of a door that's always locked to you and finally accepting it'll never open. And then slowly, steadily, I looked my father in the eye and asked him something I had held inside for over 20 years. What about me? If Olivia hadn't made it because of Julia's reckless choice, would I be expected to step aside again? Ever since Mom died, I've been stepping aside. I stepped aside for the love you used to have for me, so that you could give it all to her. I stepped aside through all the years of living with a man who drank beer every night and stayed silent when another drunk killed his wife. How long do you want me to keep stepping aside? The hallway went still. My father didn't answer. He didn't walk away. He didn't come closer. He just stood there, fists clenched, eyes staring off into the distance. He was reaching for something to hold on to, but couldn't find it. I said nothing else. Nick was still in the room, sitting beside Olivia, his hand resting gently on her forehead, eyes shut, as if he knew that if he opened them again, it might be one pain too many to take. And in that moment, I knew this had gone beyond any of us. No one could keep anything to themselves anymore. Because after all the silence and all the wounds, the only thing left now was the truth in court. After that day, Silence remained between me and my family. Everything felt like it had been placed in standby mode, waiting for something no one wanted to happen. My daughter was discharged the next morning. Her vitals had stabilized, though she would need regular follow-ups for a long time. Nick sat in the back seat, holding her while I drove, gripped by a feeling I couldn't fully explain. Like I was trying to balance the joy of bringing my daughter home with the quiet truth that some things in my family would never return to how they were. After what we had been through, we came to understand something that should have always been simple. Caring for a child isn't just about feeding them or keeping them safe when crossing the street. Even if your child has no pre-existing conditions, no allergies, no special vulnerabilities, any action that crosses clear boundaries can become a threat. And sometimes just one careless moment from an adult is enough to push a child into a place no one could have seen coming. After witnessing everything, I no longer saw my sister's actions as an unfortunate accident. It was a wrong choice that needs to be called by its real name, and it's something that deserves to be condemned. Nearly a month after the official notice from the district attorney's office, the criminal trial for Julia was held at the Audi County Courthouse, the venue that handles serious offenses in the Appleton area. Due to the nature of the case, the court classified it strictly as a criminal matter, not one that could be resolved through civil proceedings. Throughout the trial, the prosecution presented comprehensive evidence, footage from the scene, testimonies from me and Nick, Olivia's medical records, and the whole investigation report compiled by Dana Morales from Child Protective Services. Julia didn't deny what she did, but she also couldn't explain how to ease the weight of responsibility. Everything was too clear. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about the consequences that had happened and could not be undone. After hours of deliberation, the court found Julia guilty of knowingly providing alcohol to a minor, recording and publicly distributing the incident, which led to significant harm to the child's health and safety. The court sentenced her to 9 months in jail, 180 hours of community service, mandatory enrollment in a public legal education program, a $4,000 fine, and a 5-year restriction from having any contact with minors unless supervised by an approved adult. At that moment, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel vindicated. I just sat there listening to each strike of the gavel, each line of the ruling, like someone watching the pieces of a family they once believed could never break, now being counted and finalized. And I understood then, justice can close a case, but it can't mend what's already fractured between those who share the same blood. After the trial, we all returned to our separate lives. There were no more phone calls from my father's side of the family, and no more apologies were sent our way. Everything slowly faded into the background, like something everyone wanted to bury, but no one had the strength to forget. As for my father, I heard about him from Uncle William, the neighbor who lives right next door, during a phone call where he checked in on Olivia. He told me that lately, my dad no longer joins his group of old friends for their usual weekend beer sessions. The evenings spent drinking on the porch had mainly disappeared. Now he just sat alone for hours, flipping through old photographs of when we were kids. The kind of photos that still held the feeling of a family that hadn't yet come apart. When I heard that, I didn't know what to say. It wasn't exactly sadness. It wasn't blame either. It was just something sinking quietly in my chest. Silent but heavy. And it stayed there for a long time. After beginning her sentence, Julia tried to contact my father a few times. Each time it started with a polite check-in, then circled back to a request to see the family again. But every time, I declined. I listened. Then I hung up, because what my father gave me in my most critical moment, and what Julia chose not to say until the very end, those were things I could not forgive. Not because I was still angry, but because I now understood the boundary that must never be crossed again. Nick changed in small ways too. He became more sensitive whenever stories about children came on the news. Sometimes when Olivia played alone in the yard, he would stop whatever he was doing, not to intervene, but to stand still and watch. And whenever he did, I would quietly walk over, say nothing, and place a hand on his shoulder. A silent promise. As long as I'm here, this family will be no more hurt. As for Olivia, she's much better now. But once in a while, she still flinches when she sees someone holding a beer can, whether on the street or just a flash on the TV screen. She doesn't say a word, but I can see it in her eyes. a slight tightening, a momentary freeze in her body, and I know that's something that will stay with her for a long time, a quiet scar without a name that no one will ever be able to erase. Today marks exactly 1 year since what happened to my daughter. Olivia is much bigger now. She started first grade. Nick packs her lunch every morning and I drive her to school. I stop the car momentarily to watch her walk into the yard, and she always turns around to wave before heading into class. Our family is still here. Everything is smaller and simpler than before, but also quieter, more peaceful. As for Julia, I heard from Uncle William that she left town shortly after getting out of jail. She hasn't been able to find steady work. No one will hire her. Her legal record is now tied to a phrase no employer wants to touch. Uncle William says my father seems to have fallen apart after Julia left, but he doesn't show it, not to anyone. I still live in the same house not far from his. We don't talk. We don't see each other. But I keep track of him through Uncle William's updates. A quiet gesture of decency. The last remaining thread of care between the ruins none of us believed could ever be rebuilt. I don't know if this family will ever sit together around one table again, and to be honest, I can't picture what that day would even look like. I'm writing this not to blame and not to punish. I want to say this. Sometimes one thoughtless moment from an adult can leave a scar on a child that never fully heals. Not every child is lucky enough to be saved in time. Not every family gets the chance to stitch things back together after they fall apart. So if you're near a child, remember, every action you take, every choice you make, no matter how small, can become something they carry with them for the rest of their lives. This is where my story ends. And before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me until the very last moments of this journey, was I wrong for choosing to stand by my daughter instead of forgiving my sister one more time? Was I wrong for choosing to cut ties with people who once shared my blood? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. If the story touches something inside you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and walk with me through the journeys to come. Thank you genuinely for being here.